This season, we've been blessed to see some great attackers in the Premier League. Haaland had an incredible start with Man City. Salah has been incredibly consistent in Liverpool's title charge. Isak is finally hitting a good run of form. And Mbuemo and Chris Wood are firing their sides to lengths we didn't assume they'd reach. But one player who's gotten under the radar, especially considering the context of his career, is Raul Jimenez with Fulham. Jimenez is a striker that over the length of his career has shown a ton of resilience. Despite being a player who bloomed at a later age and having experienced a devastating injury that felt like it was going to be the end of his career, he still managed to display his ability as a quality striker in world football. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Jimenez is some world-class striker that walks onto any team in the world, but over the years he's definitely done himself enough favors to build himself a case as a solid, reliable striker of this generation. To be honest, I'd take him at United over Haaland and Xerxes in the heartbeat, but I'd also take Mini Minter and Theo Baker up top at this very moment, so that goes to show our situation, huh? Jimenez this season is starting to hit some good form, and it's an absolute beauty to see, especially as a Mexican watching the Premier League. But had things panned out differently for Raul Jimenez's career, he might not even be on the pitch at this point in time, which goes to show just how resilient this guy's been throughout his entire career to make a name for himself. So I wanted to explore Jimenez's career to date and how he was able to rise up to the European football, face a major setback, and get back into the form that he's in now. And real quick, boys, if you're new to the channel enjoying the content, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe. We're dropping weekly football videos, so make sure you hit that notification bell as well so you don't miss an upload. And if you're not new to the channel, boys, welcome back. Glad to have you around for another video. But with that being said, let's get into the tumultuous career of Raul Jimenez so far. So as I mentioned, Jimenez was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to being a respected footballer in Europe. He didn't really have his first good European campaign until he was about 25 years old, which he was able to accomplish at Benfica, which considering his background makes a lot of sense. In case for some reason you missed it when I mentioned it, Raul Jimenez is Mexican, so he got his playing career started in Mexico, specifically Club America. He would get started at America at a very young age and made his way through the youth ranks and eventually made his senior debut in 2011. At a young age, Jimenez would display many of the attributes that eventually allowed him to flourish in the Premier League: good link-up play, an ability to hold up the ball, and most importantly, an elite ability to sniff out a goal. He would continue to get sporadic minutes at America, but the 2012 Olympics with Mexico would change everything for him, because this summer they would win the gold medal against a Brazil led by Neymar, which for Jimenez allowed him to finally be considered for the starting spot at America. And that summer, the club also sold Vicente Uoso, which did create a spot for Jimenez to fill in. Once it started with America, Jimenez would start to have more good seasons than bad ones with the club. He would have multiple campaigns where his goals would prove to be key in chasing league titles. Ultimately, Jimenez would be able to rack up 2 Liga MX titles during this time there, but it was clear that he had something to offer outside of this league. And it became even more clear when in the summer of 2014, Atletico Madrid came knocking. Mexican players very rarely move to top European clubs straight from their parent club in Mexico. It's usually just down to the fact that they're either just not good enough, or sometimes the parent club just doesn't let them leave. So this was a good move for Jimenez. It was a good sign. Jimenez did have the luxury of playing for one of the most globally known Mexican sides, but ultimately Atletico would want Jimenez due to his ability and his potential as a striker. So on August 13th, 2014, Atletico Madrid signed Raul Jimenez for 11 million euros. On paper, this was a move that made sense because with Atletico Madrid, as I've mentioned before, they have a knack for developing young, good strikers into elite world beaters. But for a variety of reasons, Jimenez's time with los Colchoneros really never panned out like he expected it to, and ultimately he would only be there for one season. On one hand, Jimenez never really performed to the expectations that were set on him by joining the reigning La Liga champions, as he would only score 4 goals the entire campaign. Additionally, when it came to his place in the pecking order, Jimenez found himself behind Fernando Torres, Griezmann, and Mandzukic, so really he only started 4 games at the club and he didn't really get a chance to gel. Alas, Athletic would decide to cut their losses short with Jimenez, and despite the fact that he had 5 years left on his contract, that would be his first and last season with the club. So on August 13, 2015, Benfica signed Raul Jimenez for just about 9.9 million euros. And then one quick thing I did want to say was that Raul Jimenez apparently almost joined West Ham on loan instead of moving outright to Benfica, which would have been very interesting. Firstly, because he would have had Raul Jimenez playing with Payet, and I would have absolutely 100% been there for that. And secondly, would have been another Mexican playing for West Ham. Very interesting to me. Nonetheless, the move to Benfica for Jimenez would be a great one, as it allowed him to get his footing in the European game. At Benfica, despite not setting the world on fire, you could tell that he was playing with a lot more confidence, a confidence that he had lost while he was wilting away on the bench at Atletico Madrid. And for Benfica, they had acquired a striker that week in week out was going to give them some good solid performances as they chase more league titles and help them continue the domestic success they had been seeing to date. His best spell for the club, as I mentioned earlier, was also his best European campaign during the 16-17 season, where he would register 11 goals and 3 assists in 33 games across all competition, all on the way to securing back-to-back Portuguese championships. As his time at the club would peter out. Eventually Benfica and Jimenez both felt like maybe it was time for a change. So after the 17-18 season, it was decided that Jimenez would leave the club on loan and he would eventually end up at Wolves. Specifically on June 12, 2018, newly promoted Wolves signed Jimenez on loan with an option to buy for 33 million euros. And this is where everything began to change for Jimenez. This season from Wolves is one that we all remembered because they came in and took the Premier League by storm. And in order to complete that mission that they were on, Wolves signed so many gems that summer transfer window because they really wanted to make the most out of their return to the Premier League. Aside from Jimenez, they also brought in players like Willy Bolly, Diogo Jota, João Moutinho, Rui Patricio, and Adama Traore to flesh out the squad. We all remember this was the Portuguese revolution that was happening at Wolves. It was insane to see, and Raul Jimenez was brought in to be the spearhead of the attack. And ultimately, the side led by Nuno Espirito Santo, which sent shockwaves through the Premier League as the newly promoted team would finish the season in 7th place. But for Jimenez, after having so many inconsistencies to this point in time with Benfica and Atleti, he finally managed to take his opportunities in the Premier League and not look back. He would end up registering 17 goals and 7 assists in 44 games that season, which had surpassed his best run with Benfica. And to those with a keen eye, you would see that he also scored 5 goals in 6 games in the FA Cup as they made a good push towards the semi-final. Jimenez quickly became a fan favorite at Wolves because this season he really was able to display how clinical he was in the box and how his movement off the ball allowed him to be in the best positions available. Notably, he did score 2 goals against Chelsea in 2 games, a goal against United in the FA Cup, a goal against Liverpool in the FA Cup, a goal against Spurs. He also managed to score in his Premier League debut against Everton. Lest we remind you, this is his first season in the Premier League. He performed so well and was so adored by the Wolves fans that Wolves had no choice but to make his loan permanent for the aforementioned 33 million euros. And the first season was so nice for Jimenez, he had to do it twice. In the following season, he would increase his output across the board as he would end up with 27 goals and 10 assists across 55 games in all competitions. This season, it felt like he had collected the 7 Chaos Emeralds and had reached a new level. It was incredibly clear that Jimenez was on an upward path when it came to his ability as a striker, specifically now in the Premier League. For the time being, he was to remain at Wolves, but it always felt like if he was able to continue on this upward path in his abilities, he might be able to make himself useful for a top Premier League side at that striker position. However, in the following season, Jimenez's world would come crashing down. Despite having a decent start to the campaign by scoring 4 goals in his first 9 Premier League games, on matchday 10, Wolves would face Arsenal. While going up for a corner, Jimenez would collide heads with David Luiz and remain on the ground on the floor after the collision. Come to find out that Raul Jimenez had actually fractured his skull and was unconscious on the pitch. After receiving direct oxygen on the field, Jimenez was taken to a hospital and went into emergency surgery. At this moment, it really felt like it was the end of Raul Jimenez's career. There was no way he was going to be able to come back from a skull fracture. Or even if he did come back to play football, there was no way it was going to be at an elite level, let alone the Premier League. It's already difficult for players to come back full strength, the same exact player after sustaining a muscle injury, and Jimenez had just suffered something that was life-threatening, let alone a muscle injury. Of course, we know now Jimenez would survive the operation, but doctors will let him know that realistically it was a miracle he even survived. So after the news had at least turned into a positive one of Jimenez making that out of the surgery, it was kind of a collective understanding that Jimenez was probably not going to be coming back to Wolves or the Premier League or even one of Europe's top leagues. But as I mentioned earlier, Jimenez was nothing but resilient. In his eyes, he had managed to battle through tough periods of play and end up making a name for himself in the Premier League. And now, despite a skull fracture, he was committed to coming back and reclaiming his spot as the main man at Wolves. He knew it was going to be an uphill battle, but he did not care. And as much as I'd love to say that Raul Jimenez came straight back into the Wolves side and picked up right where he left off, this was far from it. As you can expect after sustaining such an insane injury and being out for a prolonged period of time because of said injury, when Jimenez came back, it felt like he was a shadow of his former self. He didn't skip an entire season or anything. He would feature in the 21-22 season for Wolves, but the abilities that he had naturally shown in the past had regressed so much. It began to feel like he was constantly just 2 steps behind, and when it came to battling with defenders, it felt like he was too timid to really dig into the physical challenges. His finishing seemed to get worse as well, which is probably in large part due to the lack of match fitness. It was just bad all around. This campaign, he would only register 6 goals and 5 assists across 36 games in all competitions, and it didn't get any better the following season. And if anything, he would end up featuring less in the Wolves side. For the 22-23 season, Jimenez would only register 3 goals and 1 assist in just 20 games of football, and he didn't even register a single goal in the Premier League. Things felt bleak for Jimenez, I'm not gonna lie. I felt like he was cooked, like maybe it was time for Saudi Arabia, Al Hilal or something like that, you know? And understandably, Wolves kind of just felt like they were done with the Jimenez project. It was gonna be too difficult for him to get back into into the side. The squad around him had changed so much, so it was time for him to go. So on July 25th, 2023, Fulham would sign Jimenez for 5.5 million euros, which would give him an opportunity to try and settle into a new environment. And in his first season at the club, we did see some improvement. It seemed like his movement off the ball had gotten sharper than what we had seen towards the end of his time with Wolves, and additionally, Jimenez would get back to scoring ways as he managed to at least grab 7 goals in 24 Premier League matches. And notably, he did score a very important late equalizer against Arsenal that would eventually lead to a Fulham victory. So after taking a season at Fulham to really reintegrate himself into just the energy and the levels that are required of the Premier League, that takes us to where we are now, this current season, and he is starting to show form of his best self at Wolves again. Despite not starting the first handful of games this season, Marco Silva would give Jimenez his first start against West Ham on match day 4, where he would register his first goal of the season. From here, Jimenez would go on to score 7 more goals and register 2 assists in his next 16 matches. And this time around, it's not just some fluke run. He has scored on Newcastle, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, Bournemouth, and Arsenal, which are all sides that have been very solid this season. It's clear when Jimenez does play this season that he's reached a point where he's no longer playing with fear. And there's probably credit due to Fulham and the environment he's in, and Marco Silva as a manager, because realistically, football is just a game of environment. There's players who don't work out at one club, who do work out at a different club, and a lot of times it's just due to what's around them. Things had gotten stagnant for Jimenez at Wolves, especially after the injury, so being in this different environment and a team with different players has helped him a ton. He confidently goes up against any defender, and he knows within himself that he's able to score on anyone, which was evidently clear when he cooked Saliba against Arsenal. Should he continue this form for the rest of the season, there's a chance that at age 33, Jimenez, who is now also the highest scoring Mexican in the Premier League, can beat his best scoring record to date. His highest scoring tally in the Premier League so far is 17 goals. There's about 16, 17 games left in the Premier League. Who's to say he doesn't keep on scoring from here? But nonetheless, Jimenez throughout his entire career has shown how resilient he can be. Even though he had it easy starting off in Mexico because he was at Club America, which gets a lot of support, and they're a very well-off club, he flopped tremendously with Atletico Madrid. There's no way to sugarcoat it. He just did not perform well. It did not work out. He could have easily taken his ass back to Mexico. Club America would have taken him back in a heartbeat. He would have been a player who just stayed there his entire career. But instead, he decided to battle it out in Europe. He moved to Benfica, where he had some decent seasons. And after Benfica, there was nothing stopping him from tucking his tail and going back to Mexico, like I said. But instead, he joined a team that had just left the championship. First season back in the Premier League, and he began to make a name for himself. The guy fractured his skull, probably inches, centimeters, seconds away, unfortunately, from a death. And yet here we are in 2025 at the age of 33. This guy's still scoring against the top clubs in the Premier League, making a name for himself. You gotta love it. This is what football is about. These great stories where players, teams, people overcome adversity and just do it. Just play football. They play the beautiful game. You love to see it. Hopefully, Raul Jimenez can break his own goal scoring record in the Premier League this year, but of course, time will tell.